following on questions as well. So, fifthly, the position also has a detrimental effect on the Ummah, who with this view will not see an impetus to work for Khilafah. I wonder what becomes of the proposition of working for Khilafah as a fard, if we all believe in it.
That's a circle argument. He's insisting it's fard. That's because he thinks it's a fard working for Safar. That's no.
But the point is that
the only fard is that when you are in power, الذين إن مكناهم في الأرض أقاموا الصلاة وآتوا الزكاة وأمروا بالمعروف ونهوا عن المنكر. And if you are in rulership, if you have rulership somewhere, you got it, and the only way to get it legitimately by Sharia is by shura or pseudo shura like Taliban, like fighting an invading enemy and getting the masses supporting you to the level that you can kick the enemy out and the majority of the people with you. So you could say that is shura by weapons, or by fight, by fact. That's the only obligatory. The moment you get that, you're obliged to rule with Allah has revealed. That's it.
I think where he's coming from is that as an ummah, we're in obviously a very difficult situation. There's no incentive for us to work for anything if we're not obligated.
No, that's not true. Because if we, for example, if in a country with the Muslim are the majority, so they have the authority, they have the power, they should have the power. If they don't have the power, it's resolved by a oppressive king or by foreign forces, we have to fight them and get them out. Because it's our right, they're taking our right. Like Taliban did, fighting foreign invader.
I think we're in a situation we don't even have a reference point. We have nothing. So, for example, Egypt, you can have a tyrant, you can have a secularist, you can have a communist.
Yeah.
People are to the level of apathy where they'll just accept it.
No,
so fighting would not necessarily be on the table.
Meaning they are not recognized that they have sufficient power as an ummah, and in that case they should establish themselves. They should not lead this tyrant, and they should strive to be ruled with Allah has revealed.
So when you say should, are they obligated to?
Yeah, obligated because they have the power. They're not exercising their power. They're
okay. We don't have the. So say I'm at home. I'm in Egypt. I'm in Cairo.
They don't have tamkeen, but they have the condition of tamkeen that they are the majority. A majority of believers, but they were not told by the people that's your obligation to take your power, your authority back in your hand,
so
that you have your shura, because the Quran says clear, الذين استجابوا لربهم وأقاموا الصلاة وأمروا بالشورى بينهم ومما رزقناهم ينفقون. As you obliged to the zakah, you're obliged to do your affairs with shura.
Okay, but that's the thing. Again, look,
that's rukn.
So we.
That's not the way it has presented to the people. I understand. But
is it fard kifaya? So I'm at home. It's pretty rough out there.
It's fard on the ummah. That's fard kifaya, but it's not khilafah. It's getting your shura and getting your sultan in your hand, which Allah made it for you and made it obligatory to you.
So are you therefore obligated to establish steps towards that? So ma lam yahtab al-wajib illa bihi fa wajib applies.
Yeah, that's very clear. That's not that an issue. The ruling with Allah has revealed is a must.
Yeah, but the thing is, what means that to get to the situation? So, Ahmed sitting at home in Egypt.
Leave Ahmed now. Egypt, majority are Muslims. They are not aware that nobody told them that Arkan Islam. They told Arkan Islam Khamsa, the famous ones. So we have Shahada, we have this. We're doing everything wrong, because from Arkan Islam is Shura. You have to have your authority. You are not allowed to be slaves. You are ordered to take matters in your hand to do. That's your order. That's your obligation. That it happens in the universe, that's Allah's action. But you are ordered. That's Sharia obligation.
So what's the designation? Is it fard kifaya, fard ayn?
It is for the ummah, the whole total. So it's fard kifaya, but it's fard kifaya to take authority in your hand. And then you become established, then it's obligatory on you as a fard kifaya for the whole ummah, actually on the rulers, the rule that Allah has revealed. That's the obligation. You call it khilafah, imara, afrit, azraq, it doesn't matter.
But this has an import in terms of methodology. Are we obligated to therefore to instigate, to rise up, to do something?
Yes, absolutely, absolutely, no doubt about that.
Okay, so basically it's the same as a hizb then. You are a person.
No, hizb claims for khilafah.
Yeah, but forget the end goal. So the obligation is to rise up, educate people. It's an obligation, as in
no doubt about that.
Okay, so
the hizb did not structure it properly.
Okay, so you're still in, so it's an obligation. That's what I'm saying.
This is clear from the Quran that I said. I mentioned the ayah in Surah Al-Shura.
But when you
ربهم وأقاموا الصلاة وأمرهم شورى بينهم ما رزقناهم ينفقون. So أمر الشورى is higher than zakah. And zakah is obligatory. It's rukn of arkan Islam. That they just mentioned in the 5 hadith of Abdullah ibn Umar was possibly maybe he deduced it from hadith Jibreel or his point of view or something, because sometimes he qala Rasulullah, sometimes his point of view. But this is cut in the book of Tawheed, by the way. You find it in the translation that this is not really the arkan. This is the rukn. Shura is a rukn in the Quran. The Muslim community, the Muslims in a place where they have sufficient numbers or sufficient physically, number-wise, the majority, they have to have their authority in their hand. They are not allowed to an invading kafir force to submit to that, number one, and they are not allowed to oppressive regime ruling by kufr or by dhulm to let it go. They are sinful in the majority. But if some people work, the sin will go. But they work for what? To get the authority back, and then they are obliged to rule with Allah has revealed. Call it Imara, call it Khalifa, call it Blue Devil, doesn't matter what is the name of it. The issue of the Hizb say it has to be Khilafah, which is the Khilafah of the Medina Nabawiyya and so on. No, it is not. The hadith is that they can't be in their domain and the ruling of Allah apply to them. It's clear that they don't need to be even joining them at the time of Rasulullah himself joined the Medina. But they're obliged to have the ruling of Allah on them like all believers.
Practically, it doesn't make much difference then, because ultimately
I don't talk about practically, but it makes difference. Yeah, it makes difference. Make the calling the Taliban to declare Khilafah and so on doesn't make any sense. The people that this entity is well known, have well-known borders established through history. In that domain, they took the power in their hand and they established they are obliged to do what Allah has revealed. That's all what their obligation. Other entities, other people have to do the job by themselves. If you say call them for Khilafah, meaning they will be the Khilafah, they have to call the others to join them. And then another implication of in the whole world situation. It will create a situation which is very difficult to analyze that both from Sharia and from factual realities.
I mean, that wouldn't necessarily negate the point of view. It's the evidence that negates the point of view. However, in this case, what I mean is that, look, what Hizb at the end of the day, for their end game is Khilafah, but ultimately they are looking to do some activism to achieve a certain end goal. Just how happens to be called Khilafah.
I'm not doubting that. That was never an issue of doubt. They're doubting the Taliban, etc., and that's what they're discussing. Because Taliban are calling for Khilafah, they are not legitimate.
This question is actually more specific than that. It's more about apathy and how do you prevent apathy.
Yeah, but that's something.
The word Khilafah with just establishing Tamkeen would effectively resolve that issue of apathy, which is Ahmed is still obligated to work to establish Tamkeen and thereby delegate people to establish Islam practically. Yeah. That's his obligation. Yeah. As in, if he doesn't do this, he would be sinful. Yeah. According to your point of view. Does the same extend to us in UK? So we're in the UK.
No, in the UK, we cannot establish any, even though we cannot. All what we can do in the UK is just to keep distance with the regime so that we don't oppress them, we don't oppress us. In the UK, we're not a structured community which can establish a state. It does not exclude that other affairs which we are running like masjid and so on, we don't do with shura. We are obliged to do with shura, but we are not a structured entity which can become a dar. We cannot rally ourselves together and declare war to another entity and have a fight. That's not our structure.
The reason I ask is back in the early days of the Hizb, they had this construct that by you being part of the Ummah, you have to support their efforts back home to establish Khilafah because you're part of the same entity. So, I mean, in the same way, if Ahmed is obligated to establish Tamkeen, to establish something with a different name, but he's obligated.
No, I'm not obligated to establish Tamkeen. Tamkeen is land from Allah. You're obligated to exercise your authority. Allah gave you an authority and made it exercised by Shura. According to Surah Shura, it's fundamental. That's the point. That's the point. And this is addressing a community which is sufficient structure to be able to exercise shura, and so it depends upon the situation. Like, for example, first Muslims in Britain has to be for sure, for example, they're establishing their school and their masajid and organizing them. They're sinful not doing that and synchronizing properly. But the problem is that they're not aware about that. Nobody ever throughout history developed that this way. Now we are in a situation we have to go to the deep roots, and then it became. The first call was the essentially Hassan al-Banna and Jama'at Islam Pakistan and then Hizb al-Tahrir. After the Khilafah is gone, the people felt a void there. When the nominal Khilafah in Istanbul is gone, felt that symbol which joined them together. But it's really a reaction to a symbol disappearing, which is essentially inefficient and even bad symbol, instead of reaction to the real thing, which is getting the authority of the Ummah back to it, which has been resolved by Muawiya ongoing. The whole history have been mixed and turned upside down. When the Khilafah, the promised Khilafah, Minhaj al-Nubuwah, cannot be al-Minhaj al-Nubuwah until it's done like a Nubuwah, like the Prophet did in Medina.
Related,
maybe Afghanistan, maybe. We don't know. Most nobody else is doing that. They will be then the one regarded as a continuation of the Medina state.
In the early inception, until, because obviously the Medina state would.
But this is an issue down the road. But now, what their obligation is to establish what Allah has. The problem we are discussing with the Hizb, they say Taliban, if they don't call, the problem is that they don't call Khilafah, they are not legitimate, they are not applying Sharia. It's even some of them go to extreme that only the Khalifa is allowed to apply Sharia and collect zakah. It's not true. That's not true. No. These people who are given the option in the Hadith and in the end of Surah Al-Anfal, who live separately, they are obliged to do all the ruling of Allah as valid to them, including collecting their zakah and giving it to their poor and doing their affairs Islamically. As an entity, as a group, as a well-structured group, as a tribe, as a people of a entity which exists before that, like natural entity like Afghanistan, even if it's created by historic mistake or mischief, like splitting another country. But that's what the situation now. They have some sense of belonging together to this area, to this tribe, to this.
Okay, so I just want to plow through these questions so there's nothing neglected. Sixthly, his position on the Hadith, if there's two Khalifs, kill the latter is ridiculous. Logically, again, without the precedent from valid ijtihad. It is armed to the Ummah, not specified to a location.
He misunderstood. In the same state, if one comes disputing the Khalifa, he's disputing with the Khalifa. He's not allowed to dispute with the Khalifa or the head. In Imara, for instance, if someone comes disputing with the Amir, he's not allowed. The same like Khalifa. Same thing. We don't dispute with the rulers. The other issue of some people say, okay, with this area, we are not happy to be within this federation. We won't separate. That's an issue which shall be studied Sharia point more thoroughly and see if it's permissible, if the central authority allows that. That's not disputing with him. We're not taking your position. We are separating. We're taking the option which have been offered to the mushrikeen in time of Rasulullah. That has to be studied, analyzed further. I didn't analyze that because I don't think it will ever, if a good Imara is established, I don't think any area in the Imara will come and if it's a bad Imara, then the people will be rebelling and so on here, right and left and center. That's the reality of the universe. That's what will happen in Islamic history. Why did people start rebelling in the far west against Bani Umayyah? Because Bani Umayyah declared all the Berbers and the Amazighs being slave, even if they're free people. So we conquer this area, they are our slave, we can sell them and buy them. Such a catastrophic situation. Do you expect the people to accept that? They were rebelled. They established separate government there. So that's what will happen physically. It has to be studied in its time and then discussed properly then. But so in the same entity, in the same Imara, you don't go and dispute with the Amir.
Okay, dispute as in raising up.
Try to take the authority. Who gives you the right to dispute? If you think you are more worthy of Imara, If the Imara is limited in time, then come to the next election. Alhamdulillah. Or if it is not limited in the constitution, which is bad, I think, it should be limited really. Then after he dies, come and put yourself as a candidate to the Ummah who choose you. You don't come and do it by yourself. That's the meaning of it.
There's a couple of related things in there. So you said at least all kinds of what is the fuqaha opinion of this? How is this even objective? It leads to all kinds of ridiculous outcomes. So example he gives, say the area of Numangan of Afghanistan belongs to Daesh. Who were there first? Are the Taliban then?
No, Daesh first. That's why this is all constructing the case is wrong. Daesh is not there first. Taliban is there before Daesh was created. We know that by necessity of history. Yeah. Isn't it? Is there a dispute about this point?
Yes, but then obviously they lost power.
Even they were there fighting in the mountains, and they are the one that battled and got to control Afghanistan, despite of Daesh stabbing them in the back and not fighting with the kuffar and doing the agenda of the kuffar. Leave all that in political analysis. Daesh are essentially a khawarij from day one. So that example historically. Now let's go to legally. If Daesh gets an area and want to take it by force, that's not acceptable. That's disputing with the right Amir. If it's a right Amir in the first place, it has to be that, as I said, the whole region decided we don't like to be, if it happens, if it can be constructed legally in Islamic law, has to be analyzed really in a more thorough way. We want to take the option which has been offered to the Mushrikeen. For sure, we deserve that option. Then there will be a popular vote there, and popular vote allow them to go. That will be not by disputing. So he's constructing things in his imagination based on realities which has nothing to do with the reality of Sharia, and that's what has been at the time of the Prophet ﷺ. You see my point?
I understand, yeah. Ultimately, you have to get
the example of Daesh is bad, but let's assume that, like for example, the one in Panjshir Valley. Panjshir is rejecting the Islamic system. He's becoming a warrior. He's not rejecting Taliban as such. So they offer him sharing in the power and all these things. He's rejecting the Islamic system clearly. Allah with the friends and so on. So he's a warrior then.
Now, how did he articulate that? Did he say, "I do not want Islamic law"? What did he say specifically?
Yeah, that's what he said. He says he wants the French system of liberalism and so on, and got support of the French. That's very obvious. He's rejecting Taliban on that. If he said no in the Bashir Rally, we want Islam, but we want to separate according to this option, he did not say that. Maybe he's not aware about that option, but independent aware or not aware. Clearly, the offer is he was dormant and doing fine and living happily over the moon when the Americans were controlling. So he's with the existing government, with the allies of the kuffar, who has to be fought. That does not come in this issue. It has nothing to do with Khalifa, disputing with the Khalifa.
Another related one. So the example he mentioned about Syria.
So the premises is that إذا بوع الخليفتين in the same dar. If it is a separate dar, has nothing to do with that. It's the two amirs. And everyone is legitimate on his own according to the hadith and the end of Surah Al-Anfal. I think it's so obvious. But they got stuck in their mind that the end of Surah Al-Anfal does not exist, and the hadith, which were, I would say, mutawatir from 4 of the Sahaba, that does not have any import. And somehow abrogated by some historical event. Can't be. So the premises are wrong. بوعلي خليفتين in the Dar al-Hijrah in the as a follower of the Prophet in the head of that one state. That's different than if some people, some area or some major block of the Muslim decide to separate and stand aside. That's completely different. That's an issue had to be studied. That's not بوعلي خليفتين. This is asking for separation, establishing a new Dar. And then when the Dar is established, there will be Imara on its own. If it is permissible, it has to, all evidence has to be studied in it can a part of the federation separate. Peacefully. By force, no. Because it will be challenging the central authority without any justification. That will be the way of gangster, not the way of the shura. It's not amrhum shura bayanahu. It has to be by shura by negotiation. If it's permissible. I'm not arguing it's permissible or not, but if we argue on Sharia ground it's permissible, then it has to be done not by force and not by bay'ah or another khalifa. You don't just take that area and make bay'ah and say, I'm separating now. It doesn't work this way. And this is understood even by the kuffar. When that happened in the confederation separated by force, without establishing a negotiation with the central power, they fought them. But you could even apply and then go through the constitutional procedure and separate. There are attempts in Texas, for example, to separate, and they're preparing things like that, and they're working with that direction for years now. And it's known to everyone. Nobody sent arms and tanks there. Because that's a federation. As you become a member of the federation, you can separate from it in a legally acceptable procedure, constitution, according to their constitution. Does our constitution contain something like that? I would say it may be possible for fuqahas to sit and study such a difficult question. But this is not a matter of urgency or importance, because the issue of the Muslim now is that they split too much into small entities rather than we want to join them and become them strong entities which will can establish and protect the rest of the Muslim world and be really a refuge and back up for the rest of the Muslims also, who may be oppressed and who may be a minority and they need someone. So for that's which we would like to give also nusra, because there's also still Muslim brotherhood which should not be ignored, not alliance, brotherhood, general brotherhood, which can't be ignored. It has to be contributed to. But this is a separate question. So this is again a circular argument.
There's a couple of interesting ones. So for example, about capability. What constitutes? So for example, so again, this guy, he's kind of picking holes in the original argument.
No, let's assume the theoretical thing that now capability, what does mean here with capability?
So what of Syria? If there's no threshold of capability, then do different cities belong to different emirs? Some to Jabhat, some to Daesh. It's a ridiculous view. So basically, if in terms of this Dar al-Islam point of view, can it be localized? What's the criteria?
All of that, what happened in Syria, because Syria, we have an entity which is called Syria, well established. Yeah, it is carved out by the Mushrik Kuffar, etc. That's, we know all of that, the mischief of the Kuffar, we know that. But that entity was established. It was, and the problem in Syria, it is compounded by the people split also in sectarian lines. For example, the Nusayri, I know that when I was following the matter of Syria until 2015, then I was fed up and gave up. The Nusayri had certain delegation to certain Jaysh al-Hur and the Ahrar al-Sham negotiating to join them because they were fed up with the Assad family in the center. Say they don't represent us, we don't want with them. But they got the impression from the other side, the other is so extremely sectarian that they declare them kafir and they are thinking about slaughtering them. What do you expect them to do that? You have a sectarian disease. You have an ethnic disease. You have a misapplication of Islam to extreme by Daesh, almost bordering on kufr. You cannot construct. Hizb itself has been confused. He never issue anything about pro-Daesh or anti-Daesh. Yeah, they didn't give bay'ah, alhamdulillah, but they never said this bay'ah is invalid or Daesh is invalid. They never issued any communique which is satisfactory. That shows the fact that they don't know what's going on. The general principle does not work. Daesh could say, we have declared Khilafah, come. So why don't you give bay'ah? The only thing is that they don't have establishment. They don't have shura. But the Hizb did not ever issue anything in a structured way. We did issue something like that. So this is not a state entity. It did not emerge the proper way. Fundamentally, the proper way, there must be shura of the Muslimin, if it's a Muslim entity. Other entities, we don't care. To the hell with them. Muslim entity. It must be the shura of the Muslimin. If the Muslimin do not have the authority, it is not valid. They don't have. Authority must be there, given by the Muslimin. Like it happened in the Medina, and like happened even offering the people of Dar to move, offer the obviously the offer would be offered to the tribal chieftain, and the tribal chieftains in Arabia at that time were consulting with the people very widely. They were discussing very widely. It was very, if you will, very consultative, very democratic. Or in the case of Taliban, because by necessity, because the country was invaded by kuffar, who introduced agents and applied clear kufr directly. First, authority of kufr is not acceptable, kuffar, over Muslims. Muslims should have the authority in their own domain. And secondly, they were applying kufr in many areas of ruling. So they fought against that as an ex-state and as people in the mountains. And they succeeded in taking it out. And Afghanistan had sufficient structure and sufficient historical identity and so on to be regarded as one entity. Maybe it should be federation is better because of their various madhab and so on, but this is maybe it's not needed. I don't know how much authority these muhafadat have there and so on, but it's sufficient. And then it is obliged to apply rule that. Are they obliged to call that we are the follower of the Prophet in the Medina? No. And most likely, if they say that, nobody will accept that. You can only think about Gaza, for example, if they infect the Pakistani people and they move and change the situation so that the state become really Islamic, and then they may come in a federation, and then we have an entity which is sufficiently big and capable to call the others to join us in a federation, or even in a confederation, and go step by step. But that's also happened historically by the Uthmani. They established themselves in Adoria, they were fighting the Byzantine, and they were trying to save Andalusia until they were fed up with the Mamluki who were blocking everything. And then they demolished the Mamluki, which is the nominal Khilafah. They should have done it much earlier. They may have saved Andalus if they had it, but they didn't. But they ultimately became fed up, and then barely on the almost the last moment, and the last moment. Otherwise, the Portuguese would have conquered Mecca and destroyed it possibly, and they stopped them just under the doorsteps of Mecca in a battle there, demolished them there. So far, the situation became miserable. So that's history. You have to manage it according to the necessity of the situation. So what I'm saying is that any entity or any tribe or any sufficiently which you could describe as a state, it must be at least a tribe or a country which is well known, acknowledged internationally. We know that by necessity, that by scanning the situation, the well established, known to be having some kind of international identity. People recognize it. Everyone that will say, this is Afghanistan. Well, there may be a dispute about certain border points and so on a little bit, but it's essentially Afghanistan is well known. And Kabul and that area and these people, Afghani, is well known since the time of Sahaba. But important is since yesterday, at least, since many decades in the past. This entity is well known and these borders are known, etc. Essentially. That entity, majority are Muslims. They're obliged to not allow kuffar to dominate them and not to allow as a community, and to have power authority in their hand. That's their obligation, and they seem to be fulfilling that. They establish an entity and its own dar. Who said it must be the dar which replaced the dar of regarded as somehow intellectual or historical or symbolic continuation of the dar al-Khilafah or dar al-Muhajirin, which was in Medina? Someone could even argue that even the Bani Umayyah and Abbas are not really the continuation, but history has regarded them as a continuation and symbolically and so on. Some will not regard them as a continuation. Some minority of Muslims, like some Khawarij and so on. But let us leave this minority point of view. So who said it's an obligation? That's the point with the people of Hizb coming forward. That's the point. And then they try to get always comparing them with Daesh and Abu Sayyaf. There's fundamental difference. It's clearly there's a fundamental difference. Abu Sayyaf may be closer, but we don't know how much identity is there in South Philippines, so that they could clearly they don't have a separate identity which is clearly distinguishable from the whole Philippines yet, unless they succeed in separation, which did not succeed for several centuries. Actually, originally all Filipinos were Muslims essentially. Then the Spaniard came and converted people by force and so on, like they did in Andalusia. So they have also, I think, the Inquisition. Someone should sit and study the history there. It's most likely the Inquisition. And the Muslim was marginalized and pushed in the south, in villages and so on, scattered without any clear identity and unable to confront this onslaught. Then America came, and they had Muslims who also resisted and have confrontation with the Americans and wars and so on, but were unable to assert themselves. Now they seem to be trying to assert themselves. But is there enough capability to have a structural entities that they, for example, negotiate with the government to separate or separate by force? It doesn't seem to be. That's what may be brought against Abu Sayyaf. But does not prevent, even if in a certain area he controls like villages or forest and so on, that if he has a control, that to apply Sharia up to his best ability. But clearly he will not be able to do anything international or anything of relevance because he's secluded that, where Taliban can do more internationally. So these things are not necessarily all as absolute as they think. But within his means in the area he is controlled. If he has real control, maybe he doesn't have real control. He goes in the forest, come in the village, few days, and receive back. There's no settled situation. It's still in a state of it's a domain of war, not really an established domain. The domain of fight has not been established yet. It's like Taliban before that. Besides, he emerged from that situation. It's not like Taliban emerged from a situation which was more or less Islam on a state before that. So there's an essential difference. Daesh is completely out of question because this is just essentially a criminal organization which has started oppressing the people and forcing them to bay'ah with some fantastic claims and which is just simply absurd. And then someone could argue even that they were doing things which bordering on kufr buwah. Like, for example, in Fallujah, for some time they prohibited people from having fridges because it makes the people soft. People should be fighter. Or cutting someone's finger who smokes. What is the Sharia injunction that you can cut someone's finger as a penalty? Sharia injunction about penalty is very clear, type of penalties. Cutting finger is not one of them, except finger for finger, that's all thing. And this is not a penalty. This is a completely mental organization. So if some of the Shabab argue with that, it shows that they have some problem with understanding what Islamic rulership is all about. So whatever it is, if we summarize everything as consistent and
just one last point. So lastly, I'm not sure I would call his views ijtihadat, as not sure he's a mujtahid, or if there's a precedent.
I will not answer that because it's irrelevant. This is all blabbery. The point of view is structured and the evidences are there. And the only way to deal with any point of view is to discuss it on its merits. That the one who is a mujtahid, or he has 2 heads, or he has 4 tails, that's irrelevant. This is all like the tahwish of the Salafi. You did not study with our mashayikh. All this doesn't get us anywhere. It doesn't get anywhere. Was Abu Bakr and Umar mujtahid? They never gone through such formalities. No, they were mujtahid in certain issues. Did have a complete madhab with usul and so on. At the time, it did not emerge. They do it naturally. Now, through history, the Ummah became literate. Things have become complicated. We have ilm al-kalam, we have mantiq, we have philosophy. So things become more structured. And still, it's not clear what should we call the Shafi'i point of view that the ijma' of the scholars of the Ummah in one generation is an authority? Should we call that ijtihad? Which is in itself, as I just argued, just headline is ultimately ending in a statement of kufr. Especially the application of Al-Hafiz ibn Hajar al-Asqalani on the rebellion. That was an old madhab. Now it has been abrogated by the ijma', has been concluded after that. It's not permissible. So it was permissible, then became unpermissible. It's a statement of kufr. It can't be. The hadith is not complete. Needed these scholars to meet and complete it after that. This is exactly the church. That's it. Is that an ijtihad? Is that a valid ijtihad? At the first sight, it looks like an ijtihad, but it is not. No. This kind of hush argument are no good for nothing. Sit on the issue, analyze it, respond to the bits of it. There's no response. It's just hand-waving arguments. No structure, no real structure.
It's the same one that Hamza Yusuf tried to use. They just look for ijaza while they are in cahoots with race.
Yeah, the same philosophy. It's ultimately. I have the feeling that this ijma issue is having is that the people were infected by, because the church was settling issues and so on by calling the conferences, which usually headed by the emperor, and making conclusions. And the moment the conclusion is made, is binding everyone. Otherwise, you are heretic or they curse you. And then with the result that they made their monks and scribe laws beside Allah. Like, for example, look at, for example, issue of marriage, for example, celibacy. All what we have, for example, which is even people doubt that it's attributed to Paul, even if you assume Paul is an authority, is that he said that let be the bishop of a certain community, the elder, which is translated in bishop, be married to only but one woman, because they will have multiple marriages. Have the diarrhea of marriages, and Paul himself seemed to be anti-sex and anti-marriage for some reason, wanted them to be married only one woman. So they were married by the order of Paul, but please don't marry too many, marry just one. Later on, it became celibacy. And they are insisting with the celibacy until now, until they are indulging in homosexuality and pedophilia and so on. That's the way it develops. If you make such ijma, such conferences become, the more the conference meets, somehow the Holy Spirit comes and spread his wings on top of all of them, and all become infallible. And then even they added in the last century, I think it's the 19th century, that the Pope is infallible, obviously not generally, but if he is, I think, in a meeting with the cardinals, a certain complicated structure. Not just a ballot, but if he issue a lexica with the approval of the candidate or something like that, then he's infallible. This is all imagination, things that just all to make people becoming lords beside Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's it. The same with these ijma and these ijaza and these things. Ultimately, it develops in that direction. You have to have connected ijaza until the messenger of Allah. So the Quran is available. Quran. And if you tadbir the Quran and issue comes difficult, then you will ask, is there any explanation? Is that Messenger of Allah is supposed to be explained? Now, let me see Sunnah. Okay, let me study. There may be some Sunnah mutawatir. Let me start with the mutawatir, start with this. That's someone who is serious. Not just taking what the scholar did and so on and regard it as the authority just on the face of it as he was a great mujtahid, or that maybe hundreds of millions are following him. No, that's not enough. That's not enough. This will can lead astray, especially if it gets to fundamental issues or issues. Luckily, it says in Muslims it didn't come. It came also to issues of aqidah, by the way, which could lead to astray. Could violate the fundamental aqidah, like this, which is ijma and the problem. That's almost bordering than getting monks and scribes to be laws beside Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That should be prevented by all means. But anyway, the way to do things is, alhamdulillah, there's no shortage of tafasir available. So both ancient tafasir, more advanced later tafasir, sophisticated like al-Razi with Ilm al-Kalam. Then we have like al-Qurtubi, quite comprehensive, although I don't like it. Somehow I never liked al-Qurtubi very much. Then we have Ibn Kathir is more the Salafi style. Then we have modern time like Sayyid Qutb. Then we have modern others doing some tafasir. So we have good collection we can read and analyze. Then we have Sirah. We have to read the Sirah. Sirah has been neglected. It's not read with open eyes and done properly, so that we can see stages of da'wah and so on properly. It's not done. Sheikh Taqi did done this only highlights and then made the mistake of Nusra, that's to establish a state and so on, because he was obsessed with the idea of the state. No, Nusra was not to establish state. State was established by the action of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala later and by agreement with the people of Medina, even the kuffar, to enter in the Sahifa. That's how it is happened. That's how history is definitely on the table. There's no escape. But this needs to go back and study history and see that more thoroughly and study the various isnad and so on and do some more work and not rely on Mawardi or rely on this and this or there's some imaginary constructs. So the point number 6, ignore it. It's just hush. I would have loved not to read it even in the first place because it doesn't bring us any benefit. This is ijtihad, not ijtihad. It's a point of view with its arguments and differences. Check. Does it fulfill? Does it bring the conclusion according to the wording and to the various evidences taken together or not? That's it. Otherwise, it will not get anywhere. Everyone can say, oh, this one is not mujtahid. He's not at the level of absolute mujtahid. Our sheikh is absolute mujtahid. The other one is only mujtahid mas'ala, muqallid. No, we follow our sheikh. Doesn't mean. Mujtahid mas'ala, even mujtahid or madhab, could be in a certain specific issue, could develop such a nice expanded point of view, which will synchronize or desynchronize with madhab, which turns out to be an excellent, well established point of view, which establishes itself and go through as the valid one when our scholars come and review it and analyze it. That's it. We should not waste time with such kind of arguments. But as I said, we have to go really more into background of really da'wah in Mecca, into Talib al-Nusra, into Sahifat al-Madina, into this issue of tahawul, which became now more prevalent. I was aware about the time past faintly, but now collecting all of these issues, that's the benefit of such a discussion. That this, I'm thinking really to have collect all of this related to the existence of various dars and the tahawul from Dar al-Muhajirin, from their own Dar al-Muhajirin, and the repercussions, what does it mean for the Islamic Ummah and so on, and get all of these on board maybe in a small treatise by itself to clarify these issues. Because all the other things just historically was that معاوية did that, the X did that, Y did that. Not even taken to board what Umar was objecting to, what Umar was doubting about, what Abu Bakr was discussing, and these are more worthy of being followed because they were the one who were coordinating and working and so establishing of the state, and they were aware about what's going on, more or less. Although not everyone is aware of what's going on to the extent like someone else is aware. And sometimes there's something happen under their nose and they are not aware about it properly to apply to the situation. Yeah, I think that's the. But anyway, it's worth it. I think that the dialogue will continue, but I think Hizb is in trouble, especially in issues of Khilafah and so on, and issues that they in Syria, especially concerning Daesh, they never issued any structured analysis of Daesh and why it is not a Khilafah. Thankfully, they don't give bay'ah. Maybe prevented by the desire of the leader to be he himself a Khalifa one day. Allah Alam, we don't want to insult people's feelings and intentions, but clearly they don't issue anything structured about that. What actually is that what motivate to do Talib al-Nusra and analyze it. And the original title was Talib al-Nusra Iqamat al-Dawla, because I thought Talib al-Nusra was leading to Iqamat al-Dawla, and it relied on the people giving bay'ah and so on. And then it emerged that Talib al-Nusra was not really for establishing a state. It was counterproductive. But then analyzing the shura, analyzing what happened in Sahifa, clarified the issue clearly. It's impossible to do it with the will of the majority of the people. We have to do it in a positive shura. But in some situation, like in Afghanistan, it is the negative shura in the sense that it is established by de facto, by the fight and the capability of expelling the external enemy and its local agents who were ruling by kufr and accepting the dominance of kufr, which is absolutely unacceptable because Islam has to be dominant. That's absolute mandatory, not acceptable. That's absolutely mandatory. Injunction by Sharia. Lillahi al-izzatu wa rasuluhu. Izzah, exaltation, and dominance has to be for Allah, His Messenger, the believer. They're not allowed to accept, in contradiction to Bani Israel. After the Babylonian exile, they were ordered to submit to foreign kings. That's what the Quran says. ضربت عليهم الذلة والمسكنة. Not only physically and then creatively in the universe, but also legally. Legally, they were not allowed to have rulership. They were forced to be degraded as a punishment for them. That's not for the Ummah. Is not the opposite. They are ordered to be dominant and to be ruling themselves and exercise the shura. They're not allowed to accept the dominance of kufr above them or rulership of kuffar above them. And I would say also the fasiq and zalim above them. But this is indeed a little bit more of structured argument. They are sinful to do that. That's the approach that should be done. not approach of that, what happened historically, that, for example, said that Khilafah and the Khilafah will be in sequence and you should dispute. That's an important aspect concerning the state when it's established. And you can substitute for all of these the way they said Khilafah, Imara. And sometimes it doesn't say ما يتاكم أمركم جميع على رجل واحد يريد أن يشق عصاكم. Who come to you and your affairs are all in one man. You agree on one man as a head of state. There's a central authority. And he wants to split you. Then strike him with the sword, whoever has. He wants to split you. Strike him with the sword, whoever is can. So he addressing the entity who are having the one entity, have their own head, and did not mention him as a Khalifa or Amir. على رجل واحد, one man, one leader. Then strike him with the sword. So that all has to be taken and analyzed more thoroughly in light of Sahifa, in light of Nusra, in light of all of these things. Not in light of some kind of imagination or some kind of constructs of Al-Mawardi and 300 or 400 years later trying to justify the miserable state of the Khilafah Abbasiyya and so on. No.
لا تنسى الإعجاب والاشتراك في القناة